So you're an early stage founder and you're looking to raise your first capital. The convertible note might be right for you. Over the years, I've worked with hundreds of entrepreneurs and raised millions of dollars on convertible notes. I'm going to walk you through the basic elements of the convertible note and help you understand whether or not this is the right fit for you. And there's always a but, there are a few associated risks with convertible notes that you need to be aware of. Of course, none of this is legal advice. If you're going to be raising capital, you definitely need to be working with an experienced startup attorney. And if you don't have one, feel free to reach out to us at westaway.co. It's important to remember that a convertible note is a loan. This is a key difference between the SAFE and the convertible note. The convertible note accrues interest and will need to be repaid if it doesn't convert, whereas the SAFE does not accrue interest and it won't need to be repaid if it doesn't convert. Now let's talk about the ever important term sheet. So the term sheet is simply a summary of the deal points for the convertible note. It's where you and your investor will do all of your negotiation. Once you align on the term sheet, your counsel will draft the final docs. Maturity date is the date at which the principal plus interest is due to be repaid back to the investor. Now, unlike a normal commercial loan, you don't have a monthly payment on a convertible note. Instead, you have to repay the investor the principal plus interest upon the maturity date if the note doesn't convert. So the clock is always ticking with a convertible note. Smart founders try to place that maturity date a little bit after the date that they're planning to raise their next round of financing. So what happens if you hit your maturity date, you haven't converted, and you don't have the money to repay the loan? Well, most convertible note investors aren't big banks and they're not big institutions. So whereas they could foreclose on your company to liquidate and have themselves paid back, they often don't. Instead, what normally happens is you enter into a negotiation to extend the term of the convertible note. Interest. As with any loan, the investor expects to be paid back their principal plus accrued interest. Generally speaking, for convertible notes, that interest rate is between 4 and 6%, simple, not compounding. In a convertible note, debt automatically converts into equity when there's a qualified financing. Qualified financing is a new round of investment of $1 million or above that sets a valuation on the company. So when you raise that qualified financing, your convertible note holders will convert into preferred shareholders, and they'll share the same rights and preferences as the new investors have. The question is, how many shares do they get for their money? Well, in order to figure that out, we need to understand whether the note has a discount and/or a cap. It's time to do some math, so let's break out those calculators. The discount rate is the discount that the convertible note holder pays relative to the price per share of the new investor. Generally speaking, that ranges between 15 and 25%. 20% is by far the most common discount rate. So let's assume that we have a convertible note holder that put $100,000 into your company at a 20% discount. And let's also assume that the new investors are paying $1 per share. The convertible note holder will pay 80 cents per share, and so that means their $100,000 will actually buy them 125,000 shares in the company. Now let's discuss the cap. The cap is the highest dollar amount at which the convertible note will convert into equity in the company. So let's assume you have a convertible note with a $10 million cap and you raise a new round of financing at $20 million. The convertible note holders in this scenario will convert into shares in the company at half price relative to the price that the new investors are paying. It's important to note that many convertible notes have both a discount and a cap. In that instance, you simply use the conversion formula that gives the investor the most shares in the company. So what's better for a founder, a discount or a cap? Well, all things being equal, the best scenario for a founder would be to have an uncapped but discounted convertible note. The discount allows for the investor to see a premium for taking a risk early on the company, but not having a cap allows you to sidestep the whole conversation of trying to assign an arbitrary value on a company at a very early stage. Now, that's the optimal scenario. It's not the most common scenario. The most common scenario is that you end up with both a discount and a cap. Other than the automatic conversion at a qualified financing, there are two other ways that the convertible note can convert, and that's at maturity and at change of control. Conversion at maturity means that the debt converts into equity upon the maturity date. Now, this can happen either automatically or optionally. If it's optional, it can happen at the election of either the company or the investor. All things being equal, it's best for the founder if this conversion at maturity happens at the election of the company, not the investor. Conversion at change of control occurs whenever there is an acquisition before there's a conversion. So generally speaking, if the company is acquired, that's a pretty high point for a founder. But the question is, where does that leave the investors? Generally speaking, there are two options here. One is a cash out payment to the investors, and that cash out, generally speaking, ranges between 1x and 3x the principal plus the accrued interest. The other option is a conversion to equity immediately prior to the closing of the deal. In this case, the debt will convert into equity at a predetermined valuation cap. I want to discuss two more points: expenses and diversity rider. Expenses is all about who's paying the lawyers to close the deal. Now, unfortunately, it's become common practice for investors to insist that the startup companies pay for not only the startup's legal fees, but also the investors' legal fees. We strongly recommend that all founders push back on this. It's an abuse of the power dynamic between the investor and the entrepreneur. We think a much more reasonable approach is to have the startup pay for their legal fees and to have the investor pay for their legal fees. The diversity rider is a new term designed to give Black, Latinx, and LGBT investors more access to investments. What it does is it requires the lead investor to make a good faith effort to include an underrepresented investor in the round. I think this is a promising step in the right direction, and I hope it becomes a standard term going forward. After watching this video, I hope you're able to step into negotiations with an investor with a little bit more confidence. And if you're still trying to figure out whether the SAFE or the convertible note is the right instrument for you, make sure to check out my video on SAFEs.